The following is a recording of our live event, which took place on January 8th, 2026. We hope you enjoy our presentation. Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome from all of us at Johnny's Selected Seeds. We're glad to have you with us today. My name is Joshua, and I am the host of this event. I have Steve Bellavia with me, ready to take us into the flavorful and diverse world of radishes and turnips. I'd like to take a moment to speak briefly to some of the work that takes place on our farm. Pictured here is the Johnny's Research Farm, located in Albion, Maine. Our farm is the heart of Johnny's and has been since 1975. In all, we manage approximately 200 acres of land across 11 sites in central Maine. Of that, we're trialing crops, producing seed, breeding cultivars, and so forth. As you may know, we grow and trial varieties on our farm in Maine and on the farms of growing partners across the US and Canada, selecting only those varieties that meet our vigorous and rigorous standards. This year, on our Maine farm alone, we planted over 3,200 varieties across 30 miles of bed feet as part of our yearly trialing efforts. Of those, little more than 175 new products met our high standards and were selected from those trials. As I mentioned, our presenter today is Steve Bellavia. Steve has worked with Johnny's for over 30 years. You could say his roots run deep. The majority of his time here has been devoted to the research farm, conducting vegetable research across many different crops. As a product manager, in addition to radishes and turnips, he currently oversees most of our heading brassicas, rutabagas, parsnips, and carrots. He is responsible for managing the assortment of these crops. Hello, Steve, and thank you for presenting for us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Joshua. And thanks everybody for joining us today. We appreciate your time. So just a little bit about radishes. They're one of my favorite crops to work with. It can be challenging, but rewarding to find the best varieties out of a large radish trial. And the specialty and Asian types are particularly interesting due to the diversity of the root shapes, color, and size, and flavor. So the topics we'll be talking about today, there are kind of the main two different groups of radishes that we offer. Small round types, which are the typical round ones you would see in the supermarket or farmer's market. Usually they're red. Sometimes they'll be purple or pink or white. And then the long and round Asian types. You'll see like the long daikons and then the round watermelon types. And then we'll also talk a little bit about growing methods for best success. We'll talk a little bit about growing in the field in warm and hot weather and how to do that to increase your odds of success. And then we'll talk a little bit about growing in unheated tunnels for spring and fall crops. That's become a little bit more popular lately. And then also, we're going to talk about some of the culinary uses for the different types of radishes. So major radish types, as we just talked a little bit, the small round types and also, excuse me, elongated French breakfast types as well. And you can see in the picture there, we have some purple round ones. That's probably Bacchus. Pink Beauty is the pink one. The white one's Pearl. And then that's probably Nelson or French breakfast, the elongated one there. So usually they're usually red, but can be pink, purple, or white. Usually they're consumed soon after harvest. They're not really storage crops. They're usually eaten fresh, but sometimes they become roasted, sauteed, or stir-fried. In the West, Westerners consume usually 1.5 pounds or 3 pounds a year on average, which is kind of typical for the US and the EU. So they're kind of a minor crop, not a major crop. And then the other major group are the large specialty types, which are mostly Asian. The exception is Neurotonda, which is a black Spanish type that is grown in Europe. So for the Asian types, there's several different types. There are the long, half long, and round types. They come in a whole palette of colors: white, green, purple, red. They're real popular in Japan, South Korea, and China. There, the per capita consumption is about 50 to 60 pounds. So really, in those countries, it's not just a specialty crop. It's really a kind of like a main staple in their diet. And one thing I really like about the large specialty types is that you can use them fresh, but they also store well for medium or long term. So you can really eat them over a long period of time. And if you travel in Japan or Korea or China, driving in the rural areas in agricultural fields, you'll see lots and lots of radishes grown there, unlike in the US. So it's kind of cool. So first we'll start out looking at our small round and French breakfast assortment. And you can see the names right on the left: Donato, Bacchus, Pink Beauty, Pearl, and then French breakfast and Nelson. This is just a sampling of these types. And then small round types. These are the varieties that we offer: Pepito, Donato, Rover, Crunchy King, and Sora. A little more detail about these varieties. Pepito, it's a nice all-around red. It's our best variety for warm weather production. In hot weather, radishes tend to become oval rather than round. It's some kind of reaction they have to the heat in hot weather. Pepito tends to stay rounder longer than our other varieties when the weather is hot. Of course, if it's very hot weather, all of the round reds can become oval. Donato, you can see in the picture, is quite similar to Pepito. It's also excellent overall. Not quite as good heat tolerant as Pepito, but pretty close. If you're going to be growing radishes in hot weather in your garden, or if you have a commercial field, we suggest you try Pepito and Donato to see which one does best in the heat. And then the next one there is Rover. This is probably our most adaptable and reliable radish. It may not always look the best in a radish trial or a production, but it rarely performs poorly. It's what we call a workhorse variety. It has a real nice globe shape, a little bit flatter than the other types, Donato and Pepito. And then Crunchy King, that's an old standard. And I would say it's probably a little less reliable, especially in hot weather, than Pepito, Donato, and Rover, but still a solid variety. And then Sora on the far right. It's an older variety. It's available organic. It's an open pollinated variety. It works well in cool weather, such as the spring and fall, but it definitely will become oval and not perform as well in hot weather as you would see with Pepito, Donato, and Rover. Another thing about these types, which I really like, is they're really easy to grow. You plant the seeds and you have radishes in 3 weeks. They're a lot of fun for kids. They have big seeds, they're easy to plant, and it's a relatively quick reward. When my kids were younger, we used to grow radishes and have a lot of fun doing so. And then these are some of the specialty round type radishes: Pink Beauty, Bacchus, Pearl, and Easter Egg. It's fun to grow these and have a mixed bunch, or put them in a bowl in your house and snack on them. These varieties tend to do best in fall and spring and fall. They don't do as well as our round reds in the heat. So my suggestion would be you're better off using reds if you have real warm weather, and that's when you want to plant. A Bacchus in particular, during real hot weather, if you grow it in the summer, it can tend to get bitter faster than the red ones. And then French breakfast types. We have 2 varieties. We have Nelson on the left and French breakfast. French breakfast is more of the traditional one. You can tell it's a little bit longer, a little bit narrower than Nelson. Nelson's it's a modern variety. It's a little more stout, but what I found is it's quite a bit easier to grow than French breakfast. A little more reliable. I would say it's our best French breakfast variety, especially if you have heat, drought, or you're growing in poor fertility. It'll definitely come through those conditions better. Also, as another aside, unless you really want these if you want elongated French breakfast types, either for your farmer's market or to grow in a home garden, I would grow it around reds just because they're easier to grow and a little bit more reliable. They certainly don't have the color of the Nelson and French breakfast, though. And then here's some information we put together for growing small round red types in hot weather. So radishes are a cool weather crop. They like cool weather, plenty of moisture, and they grow easier and better and have better, sweeter, and milder flavor in the spring and fall. The small round types, especially open pollinated ones, are sensitive to the heat and erratic rainfall. As we mentioned earlier, hot weather can cause the roots to become oval, malformed, or even unmarketable. So for best crops in warm weather, we suggest you choose heat-tolerant varieties, irrigate regularly if rain is inadequate. And the best ones that we have, as we discussed earlier, Pepito, Donato, and Rover. Again, Pepito will hold its shape best in hot weather, Donato a second, runner up, and Rover pretty darn good. And some folks choose to grow radishes in unheated tunnels in the shoulder seasons, meaning spring and fall. They also can be grown in the greenhouse throughout the winter in mild areas. So a few tidbits of information for growing these in the tunnel. Sow the seeds about 1.5 inches apart and a depth of about 1/2 inch. And you want the rows to be about 3.5 inches apart. What that does, it'll maximize production since greenhouse space is precious, but also should give you enough room to get a nice, good marketable crop. Irrigation can be a little bit tricky when you're growing these in the greenhouse. You have to be careful not to overwater or you can get crack roots. So the first week after sowing, we recommend you irrigate heavily to really get the soil really good and moist. That'll allow for good stand establishment and a good taproot so that the plant can uptake water and nutrients when it grows and makes a radish. The middle part of the season, weeks 2 to 4, we recommend irrigating only if the soil is very dry or the plants look water stressed. Over irrigating during this time can cause the roots to crack. So the last week, which usually would be the 5th week prior to harvest, we suggest irrigating moderately to finish the crop, but not too much to crack it. And what you might have noticed before is you would see most of these radishes are 21 to 24 days of maturity. And here we're talking about 4 or 5 weeks, which exceeds that in a number of days. And the reason this is looking like they're longer is because we're growing them in the spring or fall when the days are shorter and cooler. So they will, in fact, take 5 weeks if you grow them in the spring or fall. For French breakfast types, Nelson has looked good, and the old open pollinated French breakfasts look good. For round reds, Rover has looked the best both in spring trials and fall trials. Donato and Pepito have been close to Rover in the spring and the fall, but not quite as nice. What I would suggest if you're just getting started growing round red radishes in the greenhouse would be to try Rover, Donato, and Pepito to see which one might work best under your circumstances. And then large specialty types, mostly Asian. Kind of a funny picture we took in the trial in the fall of 2024. This was at one of our research farms. This is probably either Miyashigi or Summercross since it's so big. And if you're going to a baseball game and you don't have an extra bat, you can bring one of these with you. And then large specialty types, mostly Asian. These are ones I think that are probably the most interesting radishes that we offer. A few things about them. They're much easier to grow than the small round and fresh breakfast types. They don't get oval or get misshapen in warm weather like the round reds or round colored radishes or the French breakfast types. And they're a lot more tolerant to hot weather and erratic rainfall. So you can get a real hot period, maybe 5 days or a week with any of these varieties. And when the weather cools down again, they'll still look fine. Likewise, if there's a drought, if you get a drought, they'll just sit in the soil. And then when it rains again, they'll start growing. So they're a lot less temperamental than the round red ones, which is one of the reasons I really like them. So a couple of the types, there's Neurotondo, which is a black Spanish type. That's the only European type we'll talk about today. And then the Asian types, again, long, half long, or round. They come in all kinds of purple colors and shapes, white, green, purple, red. Real popular again in Asia, especially Japan, South Korea, and China. Another thing I like about these types is they're suitable for medium or short-term storage. This allows you to have radishes in the fall and even into winter and early spring out of storage, something you couldn't do with the small round red types. And then here's a little graph that just shows you the different root size in the silhouette form. And you can look at that and see about how long or big the diameter would be. Kind of a pretty slide. And then this is the planting program that we've created. You can find this in the print catalog or on the website. This basically will keep you out of trouble. So if you want to grow, for example, Purple Heart, you can look and you can see that there's a blue band, which is the planting date, and then the orange band is which is when you're going to harvest it. So you know you can plant Purple Heart from the cool spring all the way through summer and get a good crop. If you go a little bit lower in Miyashigi, you can see the blue band for planting is in the warm summer slot, and then the orange slot for harvest is in the fall and winter. If you tried to sow Miyashigi in the spring, what's probably going to happen is it's going to bolt and make a seed head and not a root, and you'll lose your crop. So you definitely want to be real careful about your planting when you plant the different varieties of these Asian types. Round reds are different. You can just plant those anytime. And then names. So all the different countries in Asia have their own names for radishes. Daikon is the common one you hear in the US. That's what they use in Japan. Mu or Mu in Korea, Lobak in China, Cantonese, Luobo, which is Mandarin in China, and then Muli in India. And there are a lot of languages spoken in India. So there are probably a lot of different words for radish there. For this presentation, I'll use daikon since that's the term that's familiar to most Americans. So black Spanish types. We offer Nero Tondo in organic seeds. This is a European type, as we talked about a little earlier. It has a beautiful charcoal black skin with pure white flesh. The roots average around 2 inches in diameter. It does best if you sow it from mid-spring to late summer. You're less likely to get bolting. I really wouldn't recommend planting that in early summer. I'm sorry, early spring. There are quite a few strains of Nero Tondo and black Spanish types on the market. We've looked through a lot of these in our variety trials, and we found some that weren't really that good. They had issues with lack of uniformity or bolting. So the strain we offer is elite, bolt tolerant, and the seeds are organic as well. I think you'll like that strain. The flavor is best in the fall and winter. If you grew it over winter, say in mild climate of California, it should be real good. If you grow them and harvest them in hot weather, they tend to get pretty bitter, so we don't recommend them for that slot. They'll store quite well for a few months at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 95% relative humidity, which are ideal conditions. You could also just put them in your refrigerator or in an old-fashioned cellar where the conditions aren't as good and they'll still last fine, just not quite as good. And watermelon types. These are some of I think, the really most interesting types we have. They average 3 or 4 inches in diameter. As you can see, the skin's white with little blushes of green and pink sometimes. And then the interior is this beautiful pinkish red color, hence the name watermelon. They're really good for quick pickles. They're good for condiments, fermented, grated on salads. They have a really nice sweet and slightly sharp flavor profile. It really makes them nice. These will store very well. I've harvested these in October and put them in my cellar, which is an old dirt cellar it's not temperature controlled. It'll get into the 40s, 45, and they'll still last into April or May. And if you had real good cold storage conditions, like say if you're a commercial grower, you could put these in cold storage in October and probably have them into May or June easily. They have real good flavor, mild, sweet for fall crops. The best tasting variety we have is red meat. Purple Heart is a little bit more uniform and smooth, the roots, but the flavor, I'd say, isn't quite as sweet. Again, these are best to sow in the summer to avoid bolting. They don't do real well from spring sowings, but you can get away with it. If you really like these types and want to have an early crop, I suggest at least waiting till the late spring before you plant them. Basically what these are, they're basically a daikon that's round. The flesh consistency is similar, it's dense and flavorful of high dry matter. But basically you get a daikon and make a round radish out of it and you have a watermelon type. And then green Luobo, again, Luobo just means radish in China. This variety that we have, it averages 5 to 7 inches, green roots, white tips and green flesh. As you can see with the sliced root, it's greener at the top, towards the top. So as you slice the roots, it gets progressively paler till you get towards the tip. It's excellent for quick pickles. You also can ferment it. Real strong and spicy flavor, especially if it's grown in warm weather. So it's really good as a condiment. You can just put a little bit in a dish to add some flavor to it. It also works real good cooked in soups. This is a traditional Chinese variety. And in China, not only do they eat it as a condiment or pickles, but they'll put it in soup, sometimes with carrots. And this variety also, it has real good long-term storage potential. It'll store from fall harvest all the way into April or May under good conditions. Again, so summer sowing for fall harvest only. If you sow green Luobo in the spring, it'll tend to bolt without making a crop. And the next variety, Cayenne Bravo, this is my favorite Johnny's variety. It's also one of our most popular. It's one of our highest selling radishes, as well as being one of my favorites. It works well in the spring and summer. It's very bolt tolerant. It's good for fresh use. It's good for quick pickles. It's good for condiments, fermented, grated on salads, pretty much any use you can think of. I haven't tried putting it in soups, but I think it would be good in that as a soup too. It also stores well right into April or May. It's got a mild flavor, slightly sweet and juicy, even in warm weather. It's what I call a good hiking or backpacking or camping radish. If I go camping or for a few days, and what I'll do is I'll take some of these with me, and you can throw them in your backpack. And even at room temperature or warm weather, you can sit on the side of a trail and munch on a Cayenne Bravo. It's pretty nice. And then Mini Mac, this is really a Korean specialty type. When the roots are real small, such as in the image right here, those could be harvested with the tops and pickled. So in Korea, they'll fold the tops over and they'll stuff them in a jar, and then they'll pickle them, usually with some hot pepper. They're quite nice. You can eat the roots as well as the leaves. Very nice. You also can let them get a little bit longer, and then you can cube them, and you can make kimchi out of them too when they're about 4 or 5 inches long. These ones are pretty flexible. You can plant them in the spring or you can plant them in the summer, and they'll do equally well from both plantings. Not a real good storage variety. This is definitely for short-term storage. And then Alpine, this is probably my second favorite specialty radish next to the Cayenne Bravo. This is a Korean type, and in Korea, their radish is usually a little bit shorter than the Japanese types. We call them half-long types. They got a pale green shoulder, which graduates down to a white root tip. I'd say it's our best tasting white daikon. It has a real firm, sweet, juicy flavor. It's really quite nice. The flesh is very dense, so it's good for fresh use. It's good for pickling, condiments, fermented, grated on salads. It has medium-term storage. You probably can store that probably maybe till, say, March or so under good conditions. A little note about kimchi. I mentioned you can use it to make pickles. So you can use this to make kimchi. A lot of Americans associate kimchi with Chinese cabbage because that's the most commonly eaten kimchi in the US as well as Korea. But kimchi basically means fermented vegetables. So any fermented vegetable can be called kimchi. So if you cube Alpine and ferment it, you basically have made radish kimchi, and it's very nice. So if you haven't tried that, it's definitely worth trying. It's also a pretty quick process. Like you figure if you make sauerkraut, you're going to take a few weeks for it to be ready. But with radish kimchi, once you start the fermentation, if it's 60s or 70 degree Fahrenheit, you should have some radish kimchi ready to eat in about 3 or 4 or 5 days, depending on the temperature. And then the Japanese daikons, as we mentioned before, these are the ones that are probably most familiar to Americans. We offer a couple of varieties. Some are cross number 3 and Miyashigi. They have big uniform roots, usually around 16 inches long. You can, but depending on the variety, you can sow them in late spring or summer. Medium storage, they don't store quite as well as Alpine wood or KN Bravo. They're a little bit, the flesh is a little more watery, not as dense, and I believe that's probably why they don't store quite as long. What they do have is a mild, juicy flavor, a little bit more juicy, but not quite as sweet as Alpine. So if you're looking for a juicy radish, this is a good choice. Also good for kimchi as well. Miyashigi, 16 to 18 inch long roots, 2.5 to 3 inches diameter. You can sow that July through early August, but don't put that one in the spring or it'll bolt. And moving on, a few different recipes, and just an overview of the recipes. There are a lot of different recipes for these types of radishes. And if you look at Asian cookbooks or go on the internet and do searches, they're almost endless. You can find some kind of Asian radish recipe to suit your taste. Radish kimchi, we already talked about that. It's not as popular as Chinese cabbage kimchi in Korea, but it's still very popular. You see that in a lot of restaurants in Korea. Soups, again, don't forget to put these in soups. They're real nice, as well as the Chinese. The Japanese also like to use them in soups. Sometimes they'll put them in miso soup. They make a nice fresh radish salad. We'll look at a recipe for a nice radish salad in a couple of slides. And also, they're also good for fermented pickles. Condiments, in Japan, they finally grate daikon, and they call it daikon oroshi, and it's eat them with fried and grill foods. You'll see that quite a bit in Japan, and they'll also use it with sashimi, their famous raw fish dish. So this is the radish salad recipe I just talked about in the last slide. So I made this about last week, and I took it into work, and we took a couple of pictures. You can see this is you can see that's either, I think that's red meat, that whole root there. And then the right, I sliced some roots just so you could see what the interior looks like. And then in the foreground, that's the grated radish. You can grate it, or you also can cut it in little julienne strips, or even little, you could even cube it, or you could make it into sort of a French fry shape. You can do whatever you want with that. I grate it just because I think the flavor can penetrate the radish a little bit better that way, and I think it's a little bit quicker. So basically, you grate or cube the radish, and you mix it with about a tablespoon of salt, and you let it sit for a half hour, and then you add cold water to it, let it sit for a little bit, squeeze it out, and then add some more cold water, let it sit, and then squeeze it about as dry as you can with your hands. And then you can put it in a bowl, and then you can mix it with the ginger and the garlic, and then the salt and the sugar, the vinegar, and the rest of the recipes. I mentioned umbashi plum vinegar. I haven't seen that used in radish salad recipes in Asian cookbooks, but I like umbashi plum vinegar, so I added to this recipe. If you're not familiar with it, it's worth trying. It's kind of like a real strong vinegar flavor. It's definitely more than you would see if a white vinegar or even some of the other specialty vinegars. So it's really nice. It's nice in Asian cooking. So you can try that and see if you like it. I also like to add crushed toasted sesame seeds. I like to use the black sesame seeds, but because I think they're a little bit stronger, and I think they pair better with the radish, but you can use white sesame seeds too. And then I usually add sesame seed oil and some hot pepper powder And these ingredients are kind of a guide. If you really like garlic, you can add more garlic. If you don't like vinegar much, you can cut that back a little bit. The one thing I would say is you should leave that 2 teaspoons of sugar in the recipe. I omitted it before, and it definitely doesn't have quite a nice balance. That little bit of sugar doesn't really make it sweet, but it kind of modifies the edge of the strongness of the radish and makes it a little bit nicer. And once you have this made, it should last easily a couple of weeks in the icebox. And then the last slide, I'm talking about turnips because I don't think we want to have a webinar just on turnips. It might be a little too short. And you grow them just like radishes. So there are a few different types. There's the purple top, which you can see in the picture. That's kind of the standard cooking radish that you see in the US, real popular, particularly in the South. It has that real nice, strong turnip flavor, which I think is real delicious. I think that's a cooking variety. I've never eaten it raw. And then we have a couple of other types. There's Hirosaki red, nice bright red skin. You can use that for cooking or fresh use. I think it's a little bit better for cooking. I think that used raw, the flesh is a little bit stronger and not quite as tender as Hakurei. So again, you can use it for fresh or cooking, but I would stick with cooking with that. It's real nice stir-fried or steamed. And then my favorite here, and the best-selling one, is Hakurei. If you go to farmers markets throughout the U.S., you'll often see this being sold, and often it'll have the Hakurei name. It's our best-selling turnip by far. I think it's probably used for fresh eating the most. I certainly use it for fresh eating, but it's also really nice stir-fried, and it's really nice steam. If you haven't tried this one, I definitely would. We've offered this since 1994, and it's kind of an interesting story about how we found this variety. We had another variety back then. I think it was called Market Express, and Rob Johnston, Johnny's founder, and I were out in the turnip trials. I think it was 1993 or 94, and we were tasting all these varieties. And we came to Hakurei, and neither of us ever tasted it before, and we ate some and chewed some and kind of looked at each other, and we didn't really have to even speak. We kind of knew we found something special. And here it is in the catalog more than 30 years later. So it's kind of a fun little story. And I think that's it for the presentation now. And I think we move into the questions and answers now. And I think Liv Dedrick will modify this for us.
That's right. Great. Thanks, Steve. We have so many questions, and we'll do our best to fit as many as we can in. So we'll get started right away. I have quite a few questions on growing, so I thought I'd start with those sort of challenges and issues with growing. So several people growing round radishes are experiencing the radishes not really bulbing up. Are there sort of common reasons maybe that cause that they could take a look at?
I think if it's summertime, that's usually when we see this. If we get a really hot spell and we plant a few rows of radishes in a trial, not only do we see oval, sometimes we'll see varieties just bolt without making a round radish. I think another thing that can cause that too is if they're not thinned properly. If the radishes are too close together, sometimes they can become a little bit elongated or not even make a proper bulb. So really, when you can seed your radishes by hand or with a machine, but you want to thin them to about an inch or so apart to give them enough room to make a nice round radish. You don't have to just do them in a single row either. You can kind of sprinkle them, so they might be in a 2-inch band, and if they have an inch on either side, they should make a good crop. So hopefully that answers the question.
Great. We have a couple people dealing with wireworms. I wondered if you could maybe just explain briefly sort of what those are, and then if you have any tips on avoiding them.
Yeah, wireworms, if I remember correctly, I think they're the larva of the clickworm beetle. And they tend to be most abundant when you have a garden that is in ground that was lawn or turf in the last year or two, that's when you tend to see most of those. I think they really like to live in lawns and turf. So if you have a garden and you're getting a lot of wireworms and it was in a lawn the last couple of years, that probably helps explain it. If not, then it's hard to figure out exactly what's going on. There are also maggots, and sometimes can get into there too. Root maggots. Those tend to be laid in early spring. So if you cut open a radish, if you can tell a difference if it's a wireworm or a maggot. And if you're not familiar with those, you could Google both of those so you could see what they look like.
Yep.
And so I think anyway, at any rate, also row cover I think can help exclude both the beetles and well, it can exclude beetles from flying in. If the larvae are in the soil before you cover them, it won't, but it will help keep out the maggots.
Great. And then, yeah, the next question was dealing with flea beetles, which I think probably the recommendation is also row cover for that.
It is. If we seed a trial at our farm in Albion, Maine, and don't put row cover over, it'll be destroyed by flea beetles. So what we do, we seed the trial, and that same day or the following day, we put a row cover over it, keep the flea beetles out. And you want to use a lightweight row cover, because since radishes are cool weather, you want to use something like Agrofabric 15 or something that provides insect protection but doesn't increase the heat under the row cover. The ones like Agrofabric 19, those are good on warm weather crops. They'll exclude flea beetles, but they'll increase the heat under the crop. So stick with the Agrofabric 19 for warm weather crops and the 15 for brassicas and radishes.
Okay, great. One more disease question, and then maybe we'll move on to some other topics. Do you have any experience with black root issues with radishes and turnips?
I think I'm guessing maybe that means rhizoctonia, which is a disease that sometimes causes the roots to elongate a little and have like this little charcoal black on it. We see that sometimes, and what I've noticed that there are differences between varieties, and in particularly types. Like I've noticed that round red types get a lot less of that than you see in the purple or pink. So if you're growing white or pink ones and you're having big problems, I would try the reds, but I don't know of a real reliable way to control rhizoctonia. It's a little bit of a tricky one. It's sometimes you see it, sometimes you don't.
All right. Let's see. We had some questions sort of related to some of the discussion of hot weather or warm weather. So I guess the first one is maybe, as you were talking about, which varieties are better for warmer conditions, like how warm are you thinking, or how hot growing conditions?
So when we grow trials here, we usually sow them beginning to middle of May. That's about when we can get into the ground and everything and work it. So from those planting dates, we usually see a fair amount of weather in the 70s and sometimes 80s and 90s. So if we get into the 70s and low 80s, usually we're okay. If we get into the 90s or 95, it's going to cause a lot of problems, even with the varieties like Pepito and Donato, which really have good heat tolerance, but it's not unlimited. Another thing too, it depends on the duration of the heat wave. If you have a day or two and it's early in the cycle, they'll probably come out of it okay. If you get a week of 95 degrees and they're like half mature, you're probably going to get a lot of elongated roots, and there's really not much you can do about that.
Okay.
But even just a little bit more about that, even like for example, if you grow Pepito or you grow Donato in real hot weather, they're going to get oval, but they still might be okay. They might not get so oval or elongated that you can't sell them or eat them. So you still might be able to get a decent crop out of them. But it's difficult. You're basically asking a radish to do something it doesn't want to do, and it can only do its best.
There was a related question. Someone was wondering when you're talking about them losing their shape, going to
Mhm,
oval, does
mhm.
that also usually correlate to flavor issues as well?
It usually does, and that's because it's associated with hot weather. Generally, if you're in the high 70s into the mid 80s, maybe a little bit hotter for not too long of a period of time, the radishes will still taste good. They just might be a little stronger. And also, some people might like the stronger flavor, unless it gets really hot, say in the 90s, where they're kind of nasty and bitter. No one really likes them then. But definitely, it'll affect the flavor, but they still should be okay as long as the heat's not too much.
Mhm. Okay, great. Continuing on with the round radishes, you were talking about growing in the unheated tunnel.
Hmm.
Um, we had someone right in our same zone, I believe. Well,
Hmm.
is the research farm 5B or 5A?
5B, I think.
5D. Okay, so this person was in 5A and was wondering if they can start them in February.
If you started them in February, um, a couple of things. I don't know if they have a heated or unheated tunnel. If they're
Unheated, yeah.
okay, if they're unheated, I probably wouldn't because, well, for one, they're probably going to sit in the ground for a while. But if you get a few sunny days and all of a sudden the soil temperature is warm enough and they germinate, and then you get a real cold snap, it might kill them. So if it were me, I would wait until March. That's what we do. If you plant those in March, um, we really haven't had any big problems with a lot of freeze damage. And then the same thing would apply to the fall. We try to sow them in the fall in September so that we can harvest them in October. We've experimented with seeding dates a little bit. Like we tried one time sowing them the first week of October, and they were looking pretty good. The size was nice, the shape was nice, but then we got a wicked cold snap and they froze and pretty much ruin the crop. So you have to be a little bit careful with sowing times. Um, so yeah.
Okay, great. Um, we had a question about irrigation, and the grower is wondering, I think either greenhouse or field, do you recommend drip or overhead irrigation for either one or?
I don't really think it matters too much. I think, I think what I would do in a greenhouse would definitely would do drip because you can control it more. In a field, I think it's less important. But I think if you're growing those radishes for a greenhouse crop where you have a lot of money and potential sales in them, I would use drip because you can control it and not overwater them, especially during those midweeks when you don't want to
Mhm.
overwater them and make them crack.
Yeah. Okay. Um, all right. We had a question about growing the long Asian types. Is there special soil preparation necessary to get those impressive 18-inch long roots?
Yeah, the big thing is you really definitely want loose, friable, well-worked soil in order to get roots that big. Um, if you if you don't have well-worked soil, or if there's a hard pan, those 18-inch Miyashigi types, the root will grow to the hard pan and then kind of fork or not do so well. If you have shallow or gravelly or rocky soil like we have, the shorter half-long types like K and Bravo or Alpine tend to be a little easier to grow. But you definitely can grow those. We grew those long ones here, and we definitely worked the soil real well before, and that's how we were able to achieve that. I will have to admit, though, that field, unlike most of our fields, has real nice, deep, sandy soil, and it's not rocky. If we grew those long radishes in our rocky fields, they probably would be bent and not look
Mhm.
anything like that.
Great. Um, could you talk a little bit about sort of maybe recommended storage practices for
Yeah.
both
So
types?
ideally, for one, when you harvest them, you can either just brush off the soil and store them, or you can wash them off and store them. Either works well. I've done both. I usually tend to wash them just because they're clean coming out of the cellar. So for storage, basically, ideally, they would be at 32 degrees with a relative humidity of 95%. If you're a commercial grower and you have those conditions, that's what you would want to do. If you don't, like myself, like I have an old house from around 1850, and it has an old dirt floor cellar, and the cellar temperature fluctuates. In middle of January, February, it might be 35 degrees down there because it's cold outside and it's not heated. Come spring, it might be 45 down there. And under those conditions, I still can keep red meat or Cayenne Bravo or Alpine into the early to late spring. It's certainly into March, they'll look good. Mm-hmm. So basically, in a nutshell, I'd say try to get as close to freezing without freezing and as high humidity as possible. That'll be the best you can do for storage on radishes.
Okay, great. All right, so now we have a bunch of sort of variety specific questions we can dig into. So one of them, the black radish Neurotondo, the person was wondering how the flavor compares to the red round radishes.
It's denser and stronger. It's one of those varieties that unless you're growing it into the fall or in the winter in a mild place like California to deep south, I wouldn't grow it because it can be real strong. And I like strong flavors, but it can be real strong and hot and kind of like a bitter flavor. So you definitely want to grow that in the fall. And if you grow it into the fall, say you plant it in July or August, I would leave it in the fall until you're getting a reasonable amount of cool weather, because that'll help bring the flavor up and make it a little more mild flavored.
Okay, great. Could you do a flavor comparison between Alpine and Hakurei turnip?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that Hakurei, it's you're comparing cats to dogs a little bit, but I think that Hakurei is a little more fruity and mild flavored, I would say, compared to Alpine. Alpine is more of that radish flavor, whereas Hakurei definitely has a turnip flavor, but for turnip, it has kind of a fruity flavor, and that's probably the primary difference. If you grow Alpine or any of the other radishes, they might be mild and sweet, but they won't get that. They won't have that fruitiness that you'll get in Hakurei. Mm-hmm. They're both good. Great. If you like one of those, you'll probably like both of them. And really, if you have a garden, they're basically grown the same way under row cover, so they're easy crops to plant at the same time and raise at the same time.
So if you were someone who was looking for the least spicy variety out there, do you have a recommendation for a less spicy one?
Did they mention if it was a round red or an Asian one?
They did not. It was just...
Yeah, I would say really, like, let's just use the round reds. There really are not significant variety difference as far as that goes. Their differences are really when they're grown. So if you grow them in the spring, either in the field or in the greenhouse, they'll be real mild, and the same thing in the fall. If you grow them in the field in the summer, how mild they'll be will depend on what the weather is like.
Yeah. Okay. All right, and then we have someone who's looking for a nice spicy purple variety.
A spicy purple one, yeah.
Yeah.
The purple one we have, Cayenne Bravo, it's you know, there's a little bit of spice to it, but not a lot. It's not purple, but if you really like the spice, the green Luobo is the one. So getting back to, I'm sorry, was that Alpine or Cayenne Bravo they were asking? They asked what's the most spicy, what was that again, the question?
We had a spicy purple they were looking for.
Spicy purple, yeah. Yeah, I've tried some of the other purple ones besides Cayenne Bravo, and I don't remember finding anything that was real spicy. So if you want Cayenne Bravo to be more spicy, I would grow it in the warm weather. It'll get a little spicy then, but it still won't be real hot.
Okay, great. We had someone ask if French breakfast radish is an OP.
The old French breakfast one we have is.
Okay.
And I think we indicate that in the catalog. The modern version of it, Nelson, it's also open pollinated, but it's not as old as the old standard French breakfast.
Could you give like the quick definition of OP for anyone who doesn't
Yeah. So
know
a
that?
hybrid is a variety produced with two parent lines. Um, so if you have those same parent lines, you can make a lot of seeds, and the hybrid seeds will be basically the same. Open pollinated, it means it's not a controlled cross. So you grew like, well, we'll just use Nelson radish as an example. So it's an open pollinated variety, and open pollinated means it was just pollinated in an open field by usually bees or some kind of insect. So that's the primary difference. You can get a lot more detailed definitions on the internet. It's kind of a nuanced topic.
Yeah. Great, thank you. We're closing in on 5 o'clock, so I think we'll do 2 more questions, and these are culinary topics. We had quite a lot of people asking about eating the tops, radish tops of either the Asian longs or the round red. Do you, I don't know, do you prefer to do that? And
So the tops are all edible. In fact, in Asia, like particularly in Korea, they even dry radish tops and use them later powdered in dishes. And they also make kimchi out of radish tops too. You can cut them and make a kimchi. So it's good for those uses. If I was going to make a salad, I probably would not use radish tops because I think that fresh they can be a little bit hairy sometimes, and this flavor can be a little strong. So if I make a stir fry at home, I'll usually use a pak choy or some other green that's really bred for that use rather than a radish top. Um, if I didn't have those greens, I surely would surely would either steam or cook a radish top. And there are also a couple of varieties in Asia of radishes and turnips that are just grown for the tops, and those tops tend to be a little bit less hairy. And if you go down south in the southern part of the U.S., they sell turnip tops specifically for that, either fresh or canned.
yeah, great, thanks. Okay, so we'll make this one our last question. This person was wondering sort of what your pick of the Asian varieties is for pickling, for fermentation pickling.
Yeah. So if you want it to be white, which is more traditional, like for a white kimchi, I would go with the canned Bravo. I think for kimchi, I like them a little bit more than the Japanese types, and the reason is that the flesh is denser. So if you have a pound of diced Alpine and a pound of diced Miyashigi, the Japanese type, and you make kimchi, you'll get a little bit more um, from the Alpine just because of the dry matter is a little bit higher. And I think that the crunchiness is a little bit better too.
Mhm. Great. Well, thank you for answering all these questions, Steve. I'm going to
Oh, yeah, you're
pass
welcome.
it off to Joshua for a few closing comments.
Thanks, Liv. Thank you, Steve, for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Oh, you're
Um,
welcome. Good fun.
Not to embarrass you, but everyone, as you can tell, Steve is a treasure, and he's a very cool guy to work with as well. To our audience, we appreciate the great questions. Thank you. We're sorry if we couldn't get to yours, but if you do still have a question after this Q&A, please reach out to us via phone or email. Our team is here to support you. As mentioned before, a recording of today's presentation, the slide deck, and additional resources will be available at johnnyseeds.com Saturday morning, January 10th, like really early, like 2 a.m. You're going to receive an email in a moment with a link to where we will post those resources. And finally, special thanks to all of you who joined us today. We hope you found this presentation informative and helpful as you make plans for 2026. Until next time, well, I guess we are in 2026. But anyway, until next time, best wishes from all of us, the employee owners at Johnny's, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone.